And so I found ways that you can actually change your feelings, change your emotions, or at least change the narrative about what you say to yourself about how you're feeling and what you're feeling. And that helps people to move past feelings that might be blocking them from being successful at achieving whatever goals they might have immediately in front of them. So the goal for the show is to have people call in who have something that they might be struggling with, where you're uncertain, doubtful about what to do next, about certain circumstances in your life. And I like that idea, and when more people get familiar with the idea that the show is on, there are going to be more phone calls. But in the meantime, I want to start with having some people who are going to be people that are able to talk with me about work that I've done with them in the past. So you get an idea about how powerful this emotion ROMEC can be. So I'm hoping a good friend of mine calls in a few moments, and when he does, I'll give you some information about him. But he's going to be calling in, and he's going to talk a little bit about the work that we've done together, which is around helping organizations deal with change. Anybody that's ever gone through any kind of organizational change knows that it's challenging on multiple levels when change happens. And so when change happens, you want to be prepared for it as leaders of an organization by thinking about what's the impact on people? What are the key people in my organization likely to feel when we announce the change, when we begin to execute and implement the change? What are people actually feeling? What's going on? And if there's something going on, is there a way for you to be proactive about addressing what they're about to experience? So if you know you're going to meet a lot of emotional resistance to the change you want to announce, is there some way you can get in front of that? Is there some way that you can be thoughtful about asking yourself, what is it people are likely to feel? And if it's not what I want them to feel, if it's not helpful for them to feel the way they're likely to feel, what should I do instead? So I want to make sure that you understand that in certain instances, there are things that you can do proactively to make sure people are really understanding what they need to be focused on in order to be helpful in helping them to deal with change in a proactive way so that you minimize emotional resistance. I like to think of it as almost like emotional landmines that are out there that you don't want to step on. You want to be clear that sometimes when people are going to be impacted by a large change in their lives, in their organizations, that when that happens, there's a problem happening, and that problem is going to have them concerned about whether or not they should even stay in your organization, whether they're worried about being laid off, or if they're worried about who they might have to work for, or the changes in their income, or their perhaps executive or other levels that they might have attained in the organization. They've got so many concerns that they're immediately worried about. And if you've got some really talented people, your best people, they're the ones that are going to find it easiest to leave because they're often fielding phone calls, sometimes regularly from recruiters, looking to have them join another company. So if you know you've got some very special, talented people.
So many concerns.
So do we have a caller on?
Chuck, it's Mark Hamill. How are you?
Oh, there you go. Hey, Mark, how are you doing? It's good to have you on the air. Thanks so much for calling in. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. You look good. You look good.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you saying that. So it's been a little while, but you and I, when we first met, Mark, I was just going to say a little bit about that. And that was we worked for an organization that had some issues around labor and unions and management, and we used a process that I had found that was really a good way of looking at how do we bring people together. And while I wasn't calling it emotional intelligence at the time, it was a lot about how people are actually feeling. And I remember one of the things that really struck me that was really important about working with you, Mark, was that you wanted it to work for everybody. A lot of times I've worked for leaders who just really want the leaders to come out ahead. And oftentimes relationships between managers and management and unions is adversarial. And you really were looking for a win-win outcome. And I remember we talked a lot about that in the very beginning. And over time that I got to know you, I know that you were one of those leaders I found that really did understand that people are your most important asset and value. And you actually acted on it, though. Not a lot of people say that, but don't always act on it. Well, and then as we got to know each other a little better, and you went off and you became a consultant and began to do some work together, I know that you got really successful in all kinds of quality assurance. I got to be a Six Sigma black belt, and you got into lean enterprise, and you really became quite successful. And you also were still trying at the same time that you're working with organizations for process efficiency and high quality and high standards. I know when you came and we talked, we always talked about what's the human element, what happens when human beings are impacted. So if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, Mark, and your background, and then a little bit about that work, I really think people would appreciate hearing about it.
Sure. Okay. Well, thanks for the kind words. So, we can kind of break up my career in two roughly 20-year chunks, which means I'm catching up to you, Chuck. So the first 20 years were really in industry. Towards the second half of that first half, it was in senior leadership positions, mostly in operations or continuous improvements, or finance and strategic planning. So I had a fairly somewhat eclectic background, but it served me well. And in that first half, those first 20 years, that was the period during which you and I had the opportunity to first work together, which was awesome. And then we've got the second 20 years. I thought I was going to be doing consulting for, I don't know, a year or two. I'm still at it. So right. I basically help organizations, and they range. Right now, I can take a look at my client list. The biggest one's about $20 billion a year, multinational company. Another one is not quite that big, but pretty darn big, multinational, all the way down to a startup company, which is actually quite exciting, and I love working with the founder there. And basically, what I'm trying to do is help develop people's internal capabilities, as mostly around strategy and value stream improvement, and ultimately trying to get them to be able to be, the company to be easier, better, faster, and cheaper. So, I traffic in change, and change is really part and parcel, I think, of the emotion roadmap. The stuff that you teach and you coach and write about it. And I don't know if you had mentioned it, but we had collaborated on a couple of things. I think you did mention it. We did an article,
right?
And then also within. I actually went back and read these things.
Your Kaizen field book.
Yeah, the Kaizen event field book. So I've read a couple of books. They're both internationally acclaimed, have won awards and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know if you're like me, Chuck. When you go back and read stuff that you read, it can be kind of scary. And usually I won't read. What I wrote.
Right.
And I won't. After you struggle with writing, because it's such a pain in the neck with the iterations, the editing, and all that kind of stuff, at least for me, I'm like, I don't want to read I don't want to read my stuff again. But I read both the article and the section within that third chapter in the field book. And the field book came out in 2009, 2010. And the good news is, I read it, I was like, man, this stuff still works. I wouldn't change a thing. I thought, which is honestly a great feeling.
Oh, that's great to hear, Mark. One of the things that I just want to comment on something you've said. When you think about what makes an organization work, Mark, it's like you had those opportunities to engage in strategy, which is the planning part. You had the chance to work in operations, which is the results part. Do you get things done in the way that you want to get them done? And then you manage the money part of it, which you don't exist unless you take care of the money. So it seems like you had the big pieces, and then what a lot of people in leadership roles don't really pay attention to, and that's where you and I connected, was on the human side of it. because there is a human side of it, and there's a lot of emotion that, I remember years ago people used to say, don't bring emotions into the workplace, leave them at the doorstep, and nobody ever did that, but people said that, and they tried hard not to bring emotion in, but what they fail to realize is how powerful emotion is for engagement, for motivation, for alignment. It's a key, I think, to why companies that really get it right, and what I always thought, Mark, is you as a leader and even as a consultant, were trying to help others to understand the importance of, hey, the people that work for you make this work. However well you plan and however well you execute, it doesn't happen unless you've got people aligned with you and working in the ways that you want them to work.
Right, 100%. Yeah, and I think where you want to go in the conversation. Tell me if I'm getting ahead of you, but as we're trying to navigate change, and anytime we're trying to improve something, that means by its very nature we're trying to change. And if we're talking about, like the title of my first book is Kaizen Event Field Book. Kaizen is just Japanese for change for the better. Kai is change, Zen for the better. And one of the, kind of the emotions, and we can talk about negative emotions, people when they see change, they're fearful, they're
right.
uncertain, they're perhaps even angry, feeling,
right.
I don't know, just intimidated. But we can also think about the positive emotions, clearly. And when we're talking about lean or continuous improvement or Kaizen, that type of stuff, I've talked in the past, not this particular session, but kind of the 3 C's. There's this notion of, the people that are engaged, you want them to feel challenged, right? So that's the first C. Courage is the second C, and you want them to be creative or have, creativity. And we think about challenge, it's not necessarily a hero's journey. We're not Frodo Baggins, in Lord of the Rings type of thing, but we're embarking on something that's gonna, we're looking for results. There's going to be some rigor. There's going to be some effort, but we want them to feel that this is going to be a good challenge. And then we got to have, like I talked about, number 2 is courage, which means they have to have some sort of confidence. There's got to be some sort of safety associated with that. And, you and I had written about how important competency or competence and credibility is in leaders. Because if you don't have that, people aren't going to trust you. If they don't trust you, they're not going to have courage, right? And then creativity, which, in many ways, if you've got the challenge, you've got the courage, and you teach people some new tools, some new methods, and you let them, kind of apply those, not recklessly, but, within a context and a framework, excellent stuff can happen. And,
well, let me stop you for a second and comment about a couple of things that you've said, because one of the things that strikes me, Mark, is you're looking at how do we set this up so it's going to be exciting for people and not so threatening, and because what people feel most around change is a loss of control. But if you set it up as like we're going on an adventure and we're going to experiencing some really positive things. But one of the things I was commenting, I had a group I was talking to today, and I was talking about how I use the emotion roadmap. And it was a lesson that you and I chatted about some time ago. And it came up in a conversation with a senior vice president of human resources I was working with the other day. And she had said that, we just experienced a bunch of layoffs, and she was at an off-site with a whole bunch of other senior vice presidents in human resources, very large organization. And they were talking about going forward, what's next? What are the next things that we have to have on our agenda and focus on and execute? And one of the things that she found was missing was, what about how people are feeling? What about what just happened to all the people that we just laid off? And one of the things that I remember, Mark, was when you and I were talking and we were writing this, was that sometimes with any kind of process improvement, it means often that organizations get leaner, which means less people. And while it's exciting to think about how to do things better and get things done quicker and take away some of the frustration that often builds up through bureaucracy and organizations, it often means there's less of us here to do it. And what happens to those other people? And I remember you had found some, at least in some organizations, some really innovative ways to say, hey, you know what? Maybe we can keep the people we lay off. If they're good people and we want to keep them, maybe we can put them in this kind of temp department, or we can like sort of source them out to other parts of the, again, you got to be large enough to do this, but source them out to other parts of the organization. When we're looking to hire people, they can go in and possibly, we can save their level of status, their executive status, if they're executives or managers, whatever they might be, and also try to keep their salary at least for about 6 months until they find other work. But maybe they can sort of be a temp pool for us, so people aren't worried about it. Or for those that we do have to let go, maybe there are ways we can help them find other employment. And I remember there aren't too many people, Mark, that I've talked to that are leaders that think like that, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted John, because I think you do think like that, and that's different and better, I think.
Yeah, and I would actually up that, in really, really good companies, and I won't, we get back to the notion of credibility, right? It's kind of the measure of character. I'm not going to work with organizations that are going to look for productivity improvements and then get rid of a bunch of people, because that's it's not very respectful. It's very short-sighted, and most really good companies that are doing this or at least trying to do it and do it right will make the commitment that no one will lose their employment. They might lose their specific position, but they won't lose their employment as a result of productivity improvements.
Well, this senior vice. I'm sorry. I just want to say this senior vice president, when she went to that off-site, it was at a very plush place, and everybody was kind of enjoying themselves and enjoying the atmosphere and the camaraderie and seeing each other again. But she said, missing from the agenda is, what are people feeling right now? And shouldn't we have that on the agenda? And shouldn't we be focused on what can we say to the people? We need to make the case that this was a good business decision, that we're going to be supportive of the people that we just let go, and that at least for the time being, there isn't any more of these coming, so that people can at least start to focus again. Because lots of times after large-scale change, people are very non-productive for a long time, waiting for the other shoe to drop and just looking around them on either side of them saying, boy, some of the people I cared about are gone now. I wonder if I'm okay. And I think she was right to ask the question, and that was one of the things we had talked about trying to get that on the agenda. And as you say, I think good companies do that, but for the longest time, and quite a few companies still today, don't really do that respectfully.
Yeah, it's funny. If you look at it from a technical perspective, and I hesitate to say that a lot of people do this, but many people are adept at problem solving. But they apply it, to technical things, right? If I've got a process that is, producing defective products, for example,
Right.
but the emotion roadmap in the application is essentially problem solving. It uses the same methodology in which we need to understand the current condition. And we can put it in terms of what's actually happening, right?
Right.
And then we need to understand what the target condition is, right? So that's kind of the what should be happening, and then we have the gap between those two things. And then we need to understand, as we would do with any sort of problem solving, on the technical side, we need to understand root cause, and then come up with corrective actions. And then ultimately, if you, as we refer to your fourth step within the emotion roadmap, then we get to pick, one or a couple of those countermeasures and then actually apply them so we can close that gap. So if we go back to like the 3 C's that I was talking about, the whole challenge, courage, creativity thing, and associated engagement and all that kind of stuff. That's how we want people to feel, right?
Right.
We know we're not going to get, some really good engagement and learning and measurable results unless we have that So, to your point, and you're always consistent about it, and I love it. It's like, okay, we got this big gap. How are we going to address that? And it's just interesting that, again, people are okay if we're talking about processes and machines and whatever it might be, those particular problems, but we don't look at it. We live in a socio-technical system, right? We work in that. We're fine on the technical side, follows the rules, the laws of physics, but then we get into the socio side, and somehow we think, I don't know why, that kind of logic doesn't apply from a problem-solving perspective.
Well, one of the things I try to do, really, especially because so many people are, technical, whether they're engineers or scientists or actuaries or underwriters or information technology or software designers. There's so many people operate from a technical perspective and are really good at it. But I think that where they're looking for some help, and one of the reasons I created the roadmap, this emotion roadmap, was because it starts with a form of emotion-based problem solving. That's exactly what I call it, Mark. So you start with, okay, so what are people feeling? And if we're going to do something, it's going to impact their feelings and it's going to be negative. Well, is there some way to make it less negative? Is there some way that we want them to feel? And are there strategies that might help us to move from feeling anxious, out of control, upset, angry, sad, whatever it is that might be coming that they think is happening with change? What you said is kind of a joyous. We're on an adventure together. It's exciting. We're gonna be better for it, and we're gonna take care of everybody as we go through this together. We're gonna be supportive and caring at the same time that we're doing all these exciting, adventurous, courageous things that are moving our organization forward. So how do you get there? And I think of it exactly as a problem-solving process, and it starts with how are people feeling. How are they likely to feel with what's going to come? What would you like them to feel if it's not ideal that what they are feeling? And how do you get from where they are to where you want them to be? And of all the strategies we think about, what's actually doable? And what are things that we're willing to do? And that's it. And it sounds pretty simple. I mean, it's pretty profound, and it doesn't always work easily, but those are the right questions. It isn't always easy to come up with the answers, but that's what the show's about, and that's why we have you on, and why we're hoping that people will call in. Well, I'm going to ask you to close, Mark, because I'm going to ask people if they'd like to call in. Is there anything that you want to leave with? Oh, by the way, how do people, if they want to work with you and get in touch with you, tell us a little bit about how they reach you? And I know you're a principal now in your organization, but you want to say a little bit more about that?
Sure. Well, thanks. You can just go to www.Talcott Ridge, like the tower that's in Simsbury, so TALCOTT Ridge RIDGE.com, and that's my website. You can contact me through that, or you can get me through LinkedIn, or you can just email me at mark.hamill, and that's Mark with a K. No Star Wars jokes. Mark with a K. Hamill, HAMEL at talcottridge.com. So that would be awesome.
By the way, I want to just mention that you went to Trinity College, and I do want to say this too, because I'm going to be on the radio station at Trinity tomorrow. I'll be doing a show similar to this at Trinity's College radio station, WRTC. I think in 89.3 for local listeners, but if you can also find them on the web as well. But yeah, I thought I'd mention that because I've got a friend of mine who's got me on the air there. So anyway, anything you want to close with?
Go Bantams. Yeah. So I think I guess the thing I would perhaps leave with is we're trying to change people's mindsets and beliefs. Which will ultimately, that's essentially culture, right? And we're trying to, and that drives people's behaviors. So when we talk about things like emotional intelligence, that is something that I think you learn through practice and through coaching, right? Mm-hmm. So, for example, one of the things that struck me, and when you practice, if you practice this stuff enough, then it becomes intuitive, right?
Right.
and I was reading one of your, I think it was one of your recent works, Chuck. It was a chapter within a book. I can't remember.
Principles of Coaching.
Exactly.
I think it was Principles of Coaching, I think.
Okay,
The
good.
International Federation of Coaches, yeah.
I think it was in there that, and this seems kind of innocuous, but, and I put it within my own context, so, because I can't remember exactly what I read, but
Okay.
when I do this, for example, when I'm dealing with an executive team or any team, right? I usually ask questions like, so how do you feel about that? And it might seem like soft and squishy, right? Especially when we're trying to improve many times, technical stuff. But we know that feelings get in the way. So it's kind of it's a really open-ended question. And some people just read that as like, oh, he's asking about if there are any technical issues. But yeah, I do care about that. But I also care about how you're really feeling. Do you feel like, yeah, this will never work because X, Y, and Z, or I'm really not behind this, whatever. So I just that's food for thought, right?
Right. I will comment on
again.
that, Mark, and I will tell you that sometimes when I've asked those questions, people kind of react funny to the word feeling, and they don't really know what to say. When they start to look for a feeling word, because we don't have large vocabularies for talking about our feelings, because we haven't learned it very often as kids. And growing up, we just kind of know we're sad, mad, or glad or something, but we don't have a large vocabulary to discuss it. But what I find is a really good way to ask that is to ask, what do you think of that? And you'll hear how people feel.
Yeah. Well, going back to, in many ways, this is a practiced and coached behavior. So if the leaders, start using that within their vernacular, when they ask open-ended questions, when they ask questions and they put in words like, how are you feeling about that? Or, what do you think? That will change, again, the way the mindsets and the behaviors. You'll start seeing other people using it with their folks. And it doesn't take too long before that, it kind of transforms the way people think and act within the organization.
Well, listen,
I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mark, so much for being on the air and being my guest today. I really appreciate it. And it's fun catching up with you a little bit. An old friend of ours, Shashi Kant, might be listening today because I talked with him today. And so I told him you were going to be on the air. Anyway, so good to talk with you, Mark. Thanks a lot for calling in, and I appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks, Chuck.
You take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right. See ya. Bye.
So, folks, you've been listening to Mark Campbell talk a little bit about a lot of things that make for organizational life successful. How do you make organizations successful? And the human element is a key part of it, but often something that a lot of people don't necessarily see or encounter or think about. I mean, they certainly have to deal with it at times, but not in ways that they're proactively thinking about it. And I think Mark's one of those few executives that really gets that. But I do want to allow you to call in. So the show's about helping people deal with challenges they might be facing in their workplace, but it could be about something in your community, something at home. It doesn't matter. I know that I'll give you a few examples of ways that I think the Emotion Roadmap has been really successful over time. I had someone call me not too long ago who was a owner of a law practice. It wasn't a large law practice, but it had been a very successful law practice for over 20 years. And he said, this is funny, he said, my wife told me to call you. She said, you're really good at dealing with emotions. And she said, you're struggling right now more than I've seen you struggle in recent times. And I think you ought to call this guy. So he gave me a call and he said, Chuck, what I'm dealing with is I'm very anxious about a slowdown in business. But that's happened before. That's happened at different times. But it's more than that. I'm also worried about artificial intelligence. And I'm worried about AI and how it's going to impact lawyers and whether or not a lot of what we do for a living is going to be done by artificial intelligence. And I'm worrying about what my competition is doing. I'm feeling more anxiety than I normally feel, and can you help? So we talked for a little while, and I understood what he was feeling and why he was feeling it. And I explained to him, I helped him with understanding that, hey, a good amount of anxiety, a healthy amount of anxiety, actually is fuel. It fuels our energy and our passion to get started on doing things that we need to do anyway, but the anxiety can be a driver. But when it's over the top, it feels like it paralyzes us. And so you sound like you're sort of on the over-the-top phase of it. What could you do to let go of that? And I said, when you found yourself with really feeling good about your business, when you found yourself in a place where you really were feeling successful about your business, what was it you were doing when that was going on? And he began to explore that a little bit. And as he began to remember what it felt like to be successful and to be highly engaged and to be proactive and positive, he said, well, I'd be marketing. I'd be looking at what we do next. I'd be looking at ways to, to thrive, to grow my business, to add to what we already do, to make what we already do better. That's what I'd be working at. So all that being said, he then began to think about, hey, I'm starting to feel a little differently about this. And he said, well, let's talk about the artificial intelligence, for instance. What could you do about that? He said, one of the things I could do, because I've been, coming across my desk a lot, is artificial intelligence for lawyers. Maybe I could take a deep dive into that. Stop worrying a bit about it and start thinking about, hey, maybe if I start looking at it and learning about it, make it work for us. Get out in front of everybody, or at least join the pack. Don't get lost in this race to understand how AI is going to be a contributor to the law practices of all of us. And all of a sudden, as we were talking, I could feel him feeling uplifted. That's the goal. So if you've got something in your mind that you think is going on in your life that you'd like some help with, this is the chance to call. The number to call, you can see it on your screen, but it's 347-437-2426. Again, 347-437-2426. And then there's a PIN you have to put in. So if you're thinking about this, you should see this on your screen, but maybe you're listening in the car. It's a little bit hard to do. But if you are in a place where you can actually write down the number, or need to write down the number because you're just listening to this as an audio stream and not as a visual stream, I'll give you the number again, and I'll give you the PIN. 347-437-2426. And the PIN is 917 017 247 pound. So I'll give you a moment to call in if you'd like. The reason I ask people to call in is just like I told you about the lawyer that called the other day, the owner of the law practice, is sometimes when you feel stuck, and you're a smart person and you're a pretty good critical thinker and a good problem solver, and you're uncertain about how to proceed, or you're feeling very anxious about what to do next because there's lots of choices out there and you're trying to make the right one, or you're worried about the decision you're going to make that's going to impact some of the people you care about in some negative ways, and you're trying to figure out how to make it easier for other people, or whether you should even do it at all. Or if you got a tough conversation coming up and you're uncertain how to begin it, and you're worried about escalation instead of resolving whatever it is that might be driving the conflict. I'm good at helping people, and I like helping people, and I enjoy it. But not only that, the reason for doing this show is so that when you call in and I help you, I explain to everybody as I'm listening to you and then helping you what it is I'm doing, so that other people can learn how to be helpful to each other. One of the things I've learned over time, for instance, is that sometimes people who hear somebody that they care about is having a problem, they want to jump right in right away and tell them what they think they should do. And if you've ever done that and you stop and think about it for a moment, you realize that typically when you do that, the other person argues with you. It doesn't work out the way you want. It's not what you hoped for. It's not that you weren't well-intentioned, but maybe what you suggested was something they already thought about and dismissed. And then they just tell you, no, that wouldn't work, and then they want to tell you why. So one of the things that you might ask, and one of the things that you might take away from today, is that if you do want to offer some advice to somebody who's struggling with something that's going on for them, I find it's always helpful to ask permission first. What I mean by asking permission is saying, hey, I heard what you're saying. Let me be clear. And then it's really helpful to reflect back to them so they know that they felt and they understand that you've really listened hard and you did hear what they had to say. And after you say that and say, I think I might be able to be helpful to you, would you be interested in something I might offer? And they say, sure. They put themselves in a whole different frame of mind, and they're much less likely to be defensive. Even if they don't like your choice, they're still appreciative that you made it. But they won't be arguing with you. Because sometimes people, when you ask that question, would it be okay if I offered you some advice? You might be surprised because they might say, no, I just felt like talking about it. Thanks for listening. And they're dealing with it, and they're going to deal with it, and they're going to address it themselves. They just wanted somebody to hear them out and just to talk about it out loud. So that's some of the thoughts that I'm having about what works here. Let's see. I got about 10 more minutes. I will give you the number to call again because it's always great to have a call if we got one. So I'm going to give you the number, and if you'd like to call and you get something you'd like to ask about or say, comment on what Mark talked about with me today. The number is 347 437 2426. And the PIN following that is 917 017 247 pound. And if you do choose to call in, I'm happy to stop what I'm going to be saying to you and addressing right now. But I always like to be prepared. So I came in and I want to just share with you something that I think is worth sharing. It's Warren Buffett. If any of you have ever heard the name before, he's perhaps one of the most well-known and famous investors in our lifetime. Someone who's run what's called Berkshire Hathaway. He's been incredibly successful investing over the years. And he's retiring this year. And he's got something that I saw quoted, and I wanted to share some thoughts. I thought they were great. A few final thoughts, he said. He wrote, I'm happy to say I feel better about the second half of my life than the first. My advice, this is Warren Buffett's advice, don't beat yourself up over past mistakes. Learn at least a little from them and move on. It is never too late to improve. Get the right heroes, and he says copy them. And I actually want to add a caveat to that, because lots of times heroes have a lot of flaws too, and I don't think you want to copy their flaws. You just want to copy the good things about them. So I just want to add that caveat. And then he said this too, and I like this a lot too. He said, remember Alfred Nobel. He's the one who has created the Nobel Prize, who, and this is reported, he said, read his own obituary. It was mistakenly printed when his brother died. And it was in a newspaper, so it got mixed up with him. And he was horrified at what he read and realized he should change his behavior. So one thing you might think about is, what would be said about you today if you passed away? What would you be? What would it be what you want? And if it isn't, it's not too late for you either. So think about the way you're living. Sometimes we say, I care deeply about my family. I love my family. Does your family really know that? Is that how you're showing up in life? Are you spending all your time thinking about work or other things and really not your family? I mean, not to say I'm questioning whether you love them or not, but is that how you're showing up? And if not, is there something you may want to change? Greatness does. This is also him. Greatness does not come through accumulating great amounts of money, great amounts of publicity, or great power in government. When you help someone in any of thousands of ways, you know that you help the world. And I like this a lot. He said, kindness is costless, but also priceless. Whether you're religious or not, it's hard to beat the golden rule as a guide to behavior. But I'm going to tell you a way I think you can beat the golden rule. So the golden rule, I've looked at this in all kinds of religions. There's a Christian, the Jewish, the Hindu, the Buddha. All kinds of religions have, something along the lines of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But what I like better than that is, this sounds silly, but I really do like this. It comes from a Willie Nelson song in 2023. Willie Nelson had a song that went something like this. Treat every day of your life as if it's your last, because one day you're going to be right. Treat everyone the way you want to be treated, which is sort of the golden rule. But then he says, and see how it changes your life. That's the motivational factor. I think your life will be better if you spend time really thinking hard and acting on and emotionally supporting others the way you want to be supported yourself. So something that to leave you with. And then I write this as one who has been thoughtless, countless times and made many mistakes, but also became very lucky in learning from some wonderful friends how to behave better. Still a long way from perfect, however. Keep in mind that all of us are human beings, whatever it is we're doing, whatever our job might be. Don't treat someone better because they have a high-level position than the person who might be someone who helps you out in your yard, in your house, in your job. Treat everyone with kindness and respect, and I think it makes a huge difference. So those are some messages from Warren Buffett. I did want to share that with you. I still have probably just a couple of minutes, so I won't ask you to call at this point. But I encourage you to tell more people about the show. And if you can, and you like the show, make sure you subscribe to it and ask to be notified. Because we're typically not on Wednesdays, but because we do this from the studio, and I'm very thankful to the studio, to Cole and Keith, the studio manager, and Cole, the technician who's figured all this out, and Wayland, who's my cameraman again today. I'm very thankful to everybody who's helping out. And this is the Simsbury studio, the Simsbury Media. And they're terrific for allowing this show to continue. And I'm going to be also on the air, as I mentioned, for those of you that like the show, I'll be on with my colleague and friend Lou Pomalis, who was on the first time I was on this YouTube Live. And Lou has a show on streaming on rtcfm.com, which is the Trinity radio station. If you're local, you can listen to it on 89.3. They have great music on this show, a lot of good radio DJs, and Lou's one of the best. And I'll be on his show from 2 to 3 tomorrow afternoon. So I want to say thank you very much, everybody, and I want to close this out and wish all the veterans who provided services that helped to protect all of us, thank you all so much for your service, and thank you for everything you've done to keep this country and all of us safe. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye now.